Okay, have you thought about under what conditions markets don't work as advertised? Did you make a list? Okay, let's talk about this together. So, what are market failures? We've said that markets provide an efficient allocation of resources, but this only works under certain conditions. One important condition is that there's perfect competition. So that means that all the information is available. Everybody knows about all these things, about the products, about quality of products, about prices, and everybody is a price taker. So my decision to produce something and how I can price it depends on the market price. I'm not able to choose the price in a way. And the decisions are private decisions. They're not collective decisions. And all the goods are private goods. I'll say a word about what that means in a second. And basically, if these conditions are not given, then we speak of market failures. And I think it's much better to understand this by the means of examples on the next slide. But basically, market failures are the classic rationale for government intervention into markets. They are separate from issues of redistribution. They are circumstances under which markets don't work. So we have to do something about it. We have to fix them. For example, through the use of anti-monopoly legislation, etc. And this is, like I said, a distinct problem from equality and redistribution. Okay, let's look at some examples. So what were your examples? Think about it. Let's see whether they pop up on the list. I'm sure they are. Okay, so let's look at some types of market failures. And one big class of market failures concerns information asymmetry. Remember when I talked about Hayek? I said, well, markets are for aggregating information. Well, if one market participant can withhold information, then of course markets will break down. Let's say, this comes in two flavors: adverse selection and moral hazard. So for the adverse selection kind of effect, there's a very famous paper, The Market for Lemons by George Akerlof. So let me explain a little bit. Let's say I want to sell you a used car, and there are two types of used cars in the world: good ones, peaches, and bad ones, lemons. And as a potential buyer of a used car, I would value my used car, say at buying a used car, say at £1,000. But of course, as a seller, if I sell you the value of a lemon is lower, so it's a car that has faults. Let's say the value of a lemon is zero, and the value of a peach, of a good car, is £1,000. Now, what happens then? Well, as the buyer, you think about, okay, I'm not sure how many cars there are in the market and how many are bad ones. So I'm gonna not pay £1,000, assuming every car is a peach, but I'm gonna discount this. Let's say I assume that half the cars in the market are lemons. Then I'm only going to pay £500, of course, on average for a car, because I don't know whether I'm going to get a car that's worth £1,000 or whether I get a car that is worth £100. £0, right? So what's the problem with that? Of course, the seller can choose not to sell. So if the seller has a lemon, what do you think the seller wants to do? Well, the seller wants to sell the car really badly, right? For £500, that sounds like a great price for a car that is only worth zero. But if you're the seller, of the owner of a peach, of a good used car, then the £500 is not enough. You would want £1,000 for the car. Now, if that's the case, you're not going to sell your car. So fewer people are willing to sell the good cars in the market. And that means that as the buyer, I notice there are even more bad cars in the market. So I'm only willing to pay, say, even less for the car. So if I think only 20% of the cars in the market are peaches, I discount even more, and I only say I'm willing to spend, say, £200 worth on a used car, because I assume it's going to be rubbish. But of course, that makes the seller even more wary to sell a good car that is worth £1,000 also to the seller, right? To sell at this discounted rate. And basically, what we end up is with a market where all the good cars are kept, nobody sells the good used cars, and people want to sell the lemons, but nobody wants to buy them. So the market breaks down, or it falls to a very, very low price kind of equilibrium for only crappy cars being resold. That's a problem, right? The market doesn't work as advertised because one party, the seller, has private information that is not visible immediately to the buyer. Okay, so we have to think about solutions for this in terms of policy. So we can think about regulation, or we can do testing, right? I could pay someone to check whether the car is good or not, or some other methods like that. Another type of information asymmetry is moral hazard. So think about car insurance, for example. If I'm fully insured, if I don't have co-pays, I'm fully covered. How well am I going to treat the car? Not very well. I'm going to be careless and reckless with it. So you have to find ways basically to align people's incentives. There are many other examples of moral hazard, basically where two people make a contract, but once you have made a contract, you kind of have an incentive to not be particularly nice or good about it in a way. Okay. So if one side has private information, markets don't work as advertised. What's the other big one? I'm sure some of you wrote this one down. Externalities. So pollution, there's lots of pollution. What is an externality? Well, an externality is if I sell you some paper or some good. Basically, the two of us you pay the price for the good, I produce the good at a certain cost, but maybe I produce a lot of pollution in the production process, and that just goes in the atmosphere and creates climate change and creates toxic smoke, etc. And that's bad for lots of people, but these people aren't asked. They are not part of the market transaction. So anytime there's an externality, we have to think about market failure and have to think about ways to fix it. And traditional ways to fix it are things like Pigouvian taxes, or we can tax carbon, for example, right? Because of this problem that basically producers or users of cars or producers of certain goods don't really care about the effect they have on the environment, but we collectively suffer, of course. So the true cost of the production process is not internalized. What other market failures can we think of? We can think of imperfect competition. All of you have heard of monopolies, right? So anytime a market participant has more market power, these kinds of problems arise, right? So if I'm the monopoly provider of water at a festival in the summer, I can charge huge amounts for a bottle of water because people have to buy it and they don't have the opportunity to go anywhere else. And we can use tools to fight those situations, of course. Then there's certain goods that don't work the way private goods do, right? So private goods, I can buy a computer, I can use it. My usage of the computer, doesn't interfere with anyone else's usage because it's just my computer. So, but there are some goods for which this works differently. And I'll say a couple words in a second, and we'll see an example. And there are lots of situations in which people don't behave like Homo economicus, right? So economists assume that people are kind of like Mr. Spock, like super rational. But in reality, people are not like this at all. And even the economists are not like that. So thinking about discounting the future, people are short-sighted. Misjudgment of risks, people are really, really bad at calculating probabilities and these kinds of things. That's why we have to teach it in school. So people are misjudge probabilities and risks. Herding and bubbles. So you see stock market bubbles and sort of these kind of things feeding on itself, and people kind of engaging in behavior that is clearly not rational. And under poverty, you can think of sort of scarcity. People make decisions that are not optimal because they just don't have the capacity to make optimal decisions because they don't have enough resources. So it is bad to use sort of payday loans, for example. But if you need to eat this month, you have to take a payday loan, although it is a bad decision on some level. So I've said a specific group of situations which leads to market failures are public goods. Public goods are different from your average private good. My phone is a private good. The bottle of water on your table is a private good. All these things work nicely in a market system. But public goods are different. These are things that are not excludable and these that are not rivalrous in consumption. So think about something like a lighthouse. So it is not possible to exclude people from seeing the warning that the state has put up, right? The warning that there's a cliff, right? But there's also no rivalry in consumption. Me watching the lighthouse, seeing the lighthouse, and being warned of the cliffs, if I'm a ship, yeah, doesn't diminish anyone else's use. And there are many goods like this that are, maybe these categories not excludable, not rivalry, or not perfect, but that are on towards this end of the scheme. And so for private goods, we can use the market to supply these goods. But for public goods, that doesn't work because we have the free rider problem, of course. So nobody has an incentive to provide these things, privately, because they can't get paid for it. So there's no market. But we still want all these things. We want, a fire service. We want national defense. We want the lighthouses and the public parks and the bridges and whatever it is. Okay, they're really important things. So how do we get them? Well, we can make the state produce them, but it's not so tricky. So let's look at this problem of public good production in a concrete example. And what you'll encounter here is the so-called prisoner's dilemma, which you may have heard of already. So think about public good production through the lens of the following example.